We are going to start with the services today for Mr. Max A. Plager. I would ask at this moment anyone who is here with us joining us in person, if you take a moment to please turn off a cell phone or any other noise-making device you might have, or place it in the silent mode. And officiating our services today is Rabbi Evan Moffick and also Cantor J. O'Brien from Makom Shalom Solel.
You're wearing a black ribbon because in ancient times, when hearing of the death of a loved one, people would tear their garments as a sign of the internal experience. So we model that today by wearing any kind of black ribbon. And if you could repeat after me, Baruch,
Birth is a beginning, and death a destination, and life is a journey. From childhood to maturity, and youth to age, from innocence to awareness, and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion, and then perhaps to wisdom. From weakness to strength, or strength to weakness, and often back again. From health to sickness, and back we pray to health again. From offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat, to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination, and life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage to life everlasting. These words, which were penned by Rabbi Alvin Fine, really express the Jewish philosophy of life and of death. They tell us that we come here in grief, but we also come here with a measure of gratefulness. Grateful that God blessed the world, the life of Max Plager. Our Jewish funeral service is fairly simple, consists of some reading, some psalms, some reflections, and concludes with the El Mole Rachamim prayer. We'll continue now with the words of the 23rd Psalm. We'll read them together in English, and then Cantor J will chant them for us in Hebrew. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Adonai roi lo hechsar Bihinodei sheyarbitzeni Alemei menuchot Yenaleini Nafshi yeshovev יונחני במעגלי צדק. יונחני במעגלי צדק, למען שמו. גם כי ילך מגץ על מוות, לא ירא רק כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צוררי. נשענת ושמן ראשי, כוסי רוויי. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני, כל ימי חיי, כל ימי חיי. ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. אדוני רואי לא אחסר, אדוני רואי לא אחסר.
At the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember Max Plager, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have joy we crave to share, we remember them. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember them. As long as we live, Max too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. I'd like to invite up Debbie and Charles, who will each share their memories.
So, I was informed this week, rather unceremoniously I might add, that funerals do not have themes. But if there's a theme for this funeral, the Hobbit comes to mind. It sounds like a strange thing, but when my parents were just married, my mom needed surgery on her eyes, and as she was in the hospital, my dad read The Hobbit to my mom. And when we were kids, my father read it to us. Alex just finished reading it to my youngest nephew. I've started reading it to my kids. And this last week, as my dad was in the hospital, I was reading it to him. So, who was my dad? A precocious 16-year-old at MIT who was thrown out of a window twice. So, the story here is when you're thrown out of a window before class starts, wait before going back in. Someone who would happily watch his grandchildren. Someone who was very happy to help new faculty members at Roosevelt University. Someone who threatened to throw out a friend of mine for eating raw cookie dough, saying that he was afraid he'd get too close to the microwave and he would explode all over the kitchen, and he didn't want to clean up that mess. Someone who didn't want a PhD in math, but kept trying anyway, again and again and again. Someone who found his, calling as a teacher. I remember when my dad first went driving with me, and he was actually pretty calm, and even I recognized at the time he was pretty calm during the time. And when we're finished, he gets out and he goes, "I now understand that green look my father had the first time he had driven with me." But that was basically it. And, he would teach me the love of bicycling. And I remember when I was on a new bicycle, I fell and I was crying. And he very calmly stated, "I'm not saying you didn't hurt yourself. I'm just saying that you were crying before you hit the ground." Thinking of, it's not just, stop and think about what you're really upset about. And falling is scary, so we're okay with that. When I wanted to do psychology in college, he didn't understand it, but he's still like, if you're going to do it, you should do it the right way, and let's figure out what that is. My dad, with Lewy body dementia, later in life, was a shadow of his former self. And the last time I went to Fermilab, where I worked for a long time, I got to take my dad with me. And so it was going through, and it was actually a really lovely experience. I was seeing my friends and whatever, and Dad wasn't really understanding what was going on, but he was enjoying being there and just enjoying being with him. I guess the last thing is coming back to The Hobbit. The moral of The Hobbit isn't the elves and the dwarves and the gold and the dragon, although dragons are cool, don't get me wrong. But you can do more than you think you can do, and just go through and sometimes just go with it and see where you end up. And I think my parents, both of them, did a good job raising us to try things that we weren't expecting to have tried. And that's going to be part of his legacy. We love you, Dad. Goodbye.
How do I sum up a man who has had so many chapters in his life? And no, Charles and I did not talk about this book theme. Dad was a teacher and Dad was a learner. He taught at Roosevelt a variety of math classes, computer science, before it was cool. For over 40 years. He led the Senate many times. He was a stalwart of that institution, and people were really surprised when he actually hung up his teaching hat. But as Charles and I talked about, he retired and he still taught. He was part of a Torah study group. Charles and I think he did that because he liked to argue, and he found a group with whom he could do it on a regular basis. He was active in and led the lay minyan at Solel probably for about 30 years. And he loved studying Judaica, the culture, history, the Talmud. He really liked going deep. And I think the thing that there's so many things I love about my father. When we were talking, where's his seders? Maria's here. Where he would share an insight, a new theme every year. And he made it a new experience. And we always had very similar foods and something new. And he always enjoyed guests. And I think he went out of his way to make people feel comfortable. And he would explain things not in a way to be like, you don't know, but to make it comfortable. And I remember when he would share with Alex, you know, it's about the 4 questions, but it doesn't have to be these 4 questions. So if you have other 4 questions, we could spend the time instead answering those. And he would share a point of view on a text. And my mother was the singer, and I'm the singer. But still, Dad doing Let My People Go was great rendition. That was the only thing we would let him sing. Otherwise, we're like, please, that's not your gift. That's okay. But my favorite was after everything was done, and he would go through Chad Gadya. And I swear, he got through the whole thing in only like 2 breaths. It was amazing. He was a reader, and like Mom, he liked the library, but then he would buy his favorites, especially fantasy and science fiction. He introduced me to the world of Anne McCaffrey and Pern, Dune, Middle-earth. He had hundreds of fantasy and science fiction magazines from the very first issue, 1949. That one I kept. And I realized he was 13 years old, and he bought it with his money, 35 cents. And Dad, I found a good home for them. I hope you know that. He was a devoted grandfather, readily changed, looked after, picked up his grandkids. And I remember when we first talked about, Alex and I, when we need a will, we had to figure out who we would leave in charge of Sam. And he said, me. I was like, Dad, you're old. He's like, I'll hire a babysitter, but me. Like, really? But he wanted to. He loved you that much. And he said, I want to be there for him. He was a cautious explorer, a reluctant traveler, to the chagrin of my mother, who I think would have traveled the world. Would he want to go? But Roosevelt was right across from Taste of Chicago. And he went to the very first one, and he went to all of them. And he figured out the best time to go was the first or second day after the lunch, like the main lunch hours, because the vendors were still really nice, and they would give you samples. That was Dad. And that's how we as a family learned about Vietnamese food, Indian food, African food, early 80s. And I think of my dad as a giver to the Minyan group, to others. He led so many Lei Shiva as his way of being part of the Solel community. To his family, to Roosevelt, as a gardener, he planted 100 bulbs in our first house. And he transplanted bulbs from their house to our house. So I'd sum it up and say Dad was complicated. He was loved, he was stoic, and he was, as one of my friends said, a really good human. And Charles and I have been saying goodbye to him steadily for 4 years. Lewy body is, like any dementia, a terrible way to go. So I'm not going to remember you that way. I'm going to remember all the gifts that you get and all the love that you had. And thank you.
We offer a verse from Psalm 121. Esoinoi el harim me'ayin yavo ezri esoinoi El harim me'ayin yavo ezri me'im Adonai Osei shamayim va'aretz ezri me'im Adonai Osei shamayim va'aretz. I lift up my eyes up to the mountain, from where will my help arrive? I lift up my eyes up to the mountain from where will my help arrive? My help, it comes from Adonai, Maker of heaven and Maker of earth. My help, it comes from Adonai, Maker of heaven and the Maker of earth.
Such a beautiful prayer and thoughtful words. And I was just thinking how appropriate it is and actually quite rare that all the three clergy from Macomb, Solel, Lakeside are here. Rabbi Sarada, Cantor O'Brien, and me, because Solel, the legacy Solel, was such an important part of Max and Shelley's life. From choir to Torah study to really especially the minyan. And I think Max was actually one of the first people ever to reach out to me when I came to Solel. I started in 2009. I think he emailed me in 2008. And I recognized what a wonderful human, as Debbie said, a mensch, and really a scholar, someone who knew the text and loved to discuss, loved to argue, loved to ask questions. And so I was thinking yesterday, members of the family, you told me that he loved Passover, that was Max at his best, was leading a Seder. And I was trying to find a chidush, a new insight about Passover, one that I hadn't heard before. And I found a good one. And it says, the thing about Pharaoh, what made Pharaoh so awful, aside from enslaving the Israelites, was that Pharaoh believed he always knew the answers. Pharaoh lacked any humility. He was arrogant. He would say to Moses, who is this God that you sent me? Pharaoh believed he had all the answers. And Judaism, our people, we thrive on questions. That's why we have the 4 questions at the heart of Passover. And so we are a people of debate, discussion, argument. That's what makes us extraordinary. That's the core of our history. And that was who Max was. Not only in Judaism, not only in his love of Judaism and of text study, but in his work as a scientist. I mean, what do scientists do? They start with questions. Math is about answering questions. The questions might be abstract or they might be very concrete, but it's about asking questions and searching for answers and being open to different answers, understanding we might not have all the answers. And that was who Max was. He had a humility. He was a smart guy, so he knew some answers, of course, but delving into study, looking, searching, debating, arguing for those answers, that was at his core. And it's at the core of who we are as Jews and who scientists are. And one of the things that I noticed about Max as well, and you mentioned the word stoic, and sometimes being stoic has a negative connotation, but for Max it was, I'm going to get through this. This is who I am. I'm going to care for my family. I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to try to be the best human I can. And even though it's a time of suffering, even though it's a time of difficulty, I'll persist. And in Jewish tradition, there's this wonderful midrash. I've probably shared it with Max. I know I've shared it at Torah study, but it's this midrash, and it's about 2 ships, and they're each near land. One of these ships is going into the harbor, and the other is going out from it. And everyone is cheering the outgoing ship, like you see in movies, and giving it this wonderful send-off. But the incoming ship is scarcely noticed. And a wise man who was standing nearby chastised the people's reactions. Rejoice not, he said, over the ship that is setting out to sea, for you know not what destiny awaits it, what storms it may encounter, what dangers lurk before it. Rejoice rather over the ship that has reached port safely and brought back all its passengers in peace. And it's the way of the world that when a human being is born, everyone rejoices. But when a loved one dies, we all feel sorrow. According to this story, though, we can also see it the opposite way. Nobody knows what troubles await the developing child on its journey through life. But when a person has lived well and lived a full life, all can take comfort in the knowledge that, like in The Hobbit, he has completed his journey successfully. And Max Plager made such a successful journey through life. It was a journey that touched many students, many people in our Jewish community, and especially his family, Charles and Kate, Debbie and Alex, Julia, Sam, Adam, and Gabriel, Shelley, of course, and friends and family, from Torah study to Minyan to Roosevelt to people he simply taught and encountered. And in Jewish tradition, we remember a loved one who has recently passed away with the words, Zichrono livracha, may his memory be a blessing. And these words convey the purpose of a well-lived life. That those who know you, those who come after you, those who remember you, look to your life as a blessing, a benediction, and an inspiration. Being a blessing means that you have touched the lives of those you knew, and that you have helped them do the same for others. For all of us here, for each life he touched and who touched his, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, may the memory of Max Plager endure among us as an everlasting blessing. God, you give us loved ones, and you make them the strength of our life and the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way, but you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you the stricken look for comfort and the sorrow-laden for consolation. God, we see life as through windows that open on eternity. We see that love endures and the soul endures as you, O God, endure forever. We see that the years are more than grass that withers, more than flowers that fade. They weave a timeless pattern in a world that is a dwelling place of your love and your glory. I'd ask you now, if you're comfortably able, to please rise as Cantor J chants El Molei Rachamim for us, and I'll read it in English.
El Molei Rachamim Shochein B'Meromim Hamitzei Menucha Nechona Tachot Kanefei HaShechina Im Kedoshim Utehorim Gezor Arakia Mazierim Et Nishmat Max Plager Shalach Leolamo Bal Rachamim Yostirehu Mesetaganavam Leolamim Vitzror Mitzvah Achayim Et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato Ve'anuach B'Shalom HaMishkavo Ve'nomar Amen.
Eternal God, full of compassion, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to our beloved husband, father, grandfather, teacher, loved one, Max Plager, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and may his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. For you, the eternal God, are his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen. May be seated. So we have a few announcements, and we'll proceed.
This concludes this portion of the service. The interment will continue at Jewish Oak Ridge and Hillside. We thank the many attendees who joined us today via the live stream. So you're aware the family is also having an online Shiva that's beginning 7 p.m. on Saturday night, and everyone is welcome to be a part of that. You can contact the family directly for details using the email that's listed on the folder that you received today as you arrived. And for those of you who joined us via the live stream, that's also available on our website as well. For those of you who will be joining us in procession, we'll ask you to please keep a few safety measures in mind. Please make sure that you have your bright headlights and your hazard lights on at all times in the procession. Please try to follow the car in front of you as closely as safety permits, especially as we make our way through intersections and make our way onto the highway. And then we'll ask you to please make sure you're obtaining an orange funeral sticker to place on the passenger side of your front windshield. At this time, we'll ask everyone to rise, and we'll escort the family, the casket, and the clergy from our chapel.